Welcome back to Next Generation.
Welcome.
Last month, we started a new series with you guys where we show you a new tool. Last month we did the drill. This month, we will be doing
the miter saw.
Yes! This is a very useful tool. We probably use it in almost every DIY, and if we don't, we're using some sort of saw, but this is our favorite of all the saws.
Yes. Ever since we've gotten it, it's the only one we use because there's lots of uses for it, so why use anything else?
And I just really like it because it makes the cutting very easy. You get a straight cut every time, and it's not a difficult tool to use.
Yes, so we're gonna go over all of the basics, some safety, and at the end we'll show you guys us using it and implementing all of the steps that we talk about in this video. So stay tuned on how to use the miter saw.
And always stay safe when you're using your tools.
Miter saws can cut different types of material. The blade that it comes with is meant to use on wood, but you can also buy other blades to use on, say, metal or any other materials. So it can do cross cuts, which are just straight cuts across your board. You can do miter cuts, which are angled straight across your board. So if you wanted to build like a frame, then you can have your angle and put your two pieces together. Or you can do beveled cuts, which will cut an angle across the width of your board. So if you wanted to build something like these shelves behind us, each of the corners are cut at a beveled angle, so they will fit together flushed perfectly on each corner. You can do all different degrees on your angles of cuts, so you can do lots of different cuts with this one saw. So that's why it's so useful.
So miter saws are not technically built to cut plywood or anything that's wider than, say, 16 inches. For instance, our miter saw cuts 8 inches, but you have the capability of cutting 16 inches if you make your 8-inch cut and then you flip the board over and you cut the other 8 inches. Some are designed with a sliding arm that allows you to cut in a larger depth.
So now we're gonna go over some of the safety features and some things that you can do to be extra safe when using a miter saw.
Safety first.
So one big thing is to keep your saw unplugged when not in use. Might be obvious, but some people may not know, so we're gonna let you know. Keep it unplugged, so if you have kids or anyone around who shouldn't be using the miter saw, they can't just come and pull the trigger because that can be dangerous.
Yes, it can be.
There's also a pin on the back of the saw that you can lock into place. So you would pull the pin, push the head of your saw down, and then put the pin into place. So it will lock the head of your saw and nobody can even pull it up and down.
And this is a good feature for if you have to move the saw around because the handle is located at the top. So when you lock the pin in place, it makes it easier for transporting the saw.
Since this saw is pretty powerful, you can bolt it to your workspace. So it already has little spaces where you can add a bolt. We have a miter saw stand, so we're able to clamp it into place and it doesn't move or shift at all when in use.
So now we're gonna go through the steps on how to use the saw from plugging it in to actually making your first cut safely.
So before we start using the saw, there's a few things that you should have ready to go before you start. First being some safety eyewear because sawdust is gonna be flying everywhere and you don't want a wood chip hitting you in the eye.
No.
It's not very comfortable. The second important safety wear are some headphones or earplugs or something to protect your ears because this saw can be extremely loud.
Yeah.
So wear some safety earwear, eyewear, and you'll be good to go. And another good practice is to wear some type of mask because again, there's gonna be lots of sawdust in the air and this isn't the healthiest thing to breathe in, especially if you're making lots of cuts, then you don't wanna be breathing this in for long periods of time.
You also wanna be sure that you're not wearing any loose clothing that could get caught up in the saw blade. Also, if you have long hair, I recommend tying that up into a bun just to get it out of the way.
So the first thing you're gonna do with your saw is plug it into a power source. And then, like we mentioned, there's the locking pin on the back. So you're just gonna go ahead and unlock it. The head of your saw is gonna pop up. So I always like to have my hand on it to avoid it popping up too fast and everything just goes flying.
So to avoid kickbacks or any rough cuts on your wood, make sure that your blade is always sharp and new. There is a recommended cuts per blade that you're supposed to change out your blade.
And then cutting can be fun and not dangerous. So we're first gonna measure and mark where we wanna make a cut on our board. I personally like to use a speed square and make a line across the entire board.
So for your first cut, what you wanna do is place the wood on the saw, against the fence.
If it's not flush against the fence, then you're not gonna get a straight cut.
So if you wanna just make a simple straight cut, make sure that the gauge is at 0, which is typically what the saw is set at when you first buy it. But that 0 indicator means that there's no angle and you're gonna end up with a straight cut. If you're ready to cut a miter cut, then what you wanna do is first figure out the angle that you'd like to cut, loosen the handle on the front of the gauge, and adjust the angle gauge to the desired angle that you would like to cut. So now that our blade is in place for the miter cut, we need to make sure that the blade will line up with the marking on our wood. Keep in mind that your blades are typically a 1/4 inch thick. So if you're cutting something where a 1/4 inch matters, you don't want to cut on the line. So where you mark your line, you want to drop the blade down without your hand on the trigger. You want to lower your blade down to your line and make sure that it lines up to where you get your true length of the board that you need.
So what I like to do is I like to have the side that I'm keeping or that I'm using for the DIY on the left side. So when I'm lining up the saw, I like to be sure that the left side of the blade is lined up exactly on the line where I want to cut, so that's where it ends up cutting it perfectly, and the left side of the board is cut the exact length that we need it, not a 1/4 inch too small or too large. It's exactly perfect. You have your wood placed exactly where it needs to go to be cut the exact length that you would like. Then we're gonna clamp one side of the board down so that it stays in place super tight, and you do not want to clamp both sides. So we're gonna clamp one side, and on the other side, we're gonna hold it with our hand. Be extra careful with this. You don't want your hand too close to a moving blade. So we like to use the standard of at least 6 inches just to be extra safe.
If you're going to be cutting wood that's longer than the base of your saw and that wood extends past the saw, you need to be sure that that wood is supported. Now, there's multiple ways to do this. If you're using the miter saw stand, there's an additional extension that can help level your board and support longer wood. If you don't have the miter saw stand, then you can just use some scrap wood, stack it up to where that wood is level and supported, and this will just promote safety, which is what we want. We want to be safe.
I think we're ready to cut. Are you ready?
I'm ready. What you want to do is engage the safety feature, which then allows you to pull the trigger. If the safety feature is not engaged, then you can't pull the trigger, which helps with safety when you're moving the saw around and you're aligning your wood. You want to engage the trigger fully, let the blade come to full operating speed before you bring the blade down to cut your wood. This is very important because if the blade is not spinning at full operating speed, when you come down onto the wood, you really promote the possibility of kickbacks, which is something you do not want. We're gonna lower the blade all the way through the wood, make sure that the wood is completely cut, and then we're gonna release the trigger, and you wanna make sure that your blade comes to a full stop before you bring it back up. We wanna let the blade do the work.
It should be very simple and smooth. You shouldn't have to put any force or effort into cutting. You should just be lowering it and the blade is doing all of the work.
Right.
So now you have your first cut. How did that feel? Do you love the miter saw as much as we do?
Do you feel empowered now?
But we're gonna show you guys how to make multiple cuts. If you want something again like these hexagon shelves, and you make multiple cuts that are the exact same size, so that you don't have to sit there and line up each board and risk them not being the exact same size, we have a tip for you guys.
So what we like to use is a stop block, and if you don't know what that is, basically it's exactly what it sounds like. It is a scrap piece of wood that is used to stop the wood that you're trying to cut at the exact desired length. So basically every time you cut and then slide your wood up against the stop block, you're gonna cut the same length every time. It just really helps streamline the whole design and cut prep process. We really recommend it.
So now you know how to do cross cuts, which are just straight line cuts at 0 degrees. We know how to do miter cuts, but we have not gone over bevel cuts. This is very easy. It's all the same steps as doing the other cuts. We're just moving our blade in a different direction.
So for the miter cuts, we were cutting the face of the wood. We adjusted the angles at the base. Now we're gonna be cutting the thickness of the wood. So now we're gonna adjust the head
of the blade. So how do we do that?
Okay, well, you're probably wondering. Let me tell you. There is a locking mechanism on the back of the saw. And this is just loosened up by your hand. It doesn't click into place like the base does. So all you do is loosen it. Make sure you're holding the head of your saw because it will fall very quickly. So support your saw with one hand, loosen the back with the other, adjust using the angle gauge to your desired angle, and then tighten it in place very tightly.
Now that we have it in place, we're gonna go ahead and make a bevel cut and show you guys the difference of this compared to a miter cut.
So one last feature for the miter saw
That I love.
that I am gonna give you a recommendation for something better. But let me just tell you, it comes with a sawdust bag, which you attach to the back, and it works, but there's a lot of places for the sawdust to go. So not all of the sawdust ends up in the bag. You still end up with a little bit of a sawdust mess on the back side of the saw where you're cutting. So what I really recommend, and this is something that we're going to eventually get, is a shop vac attachment. So the sawdust bag and the shop vac have the same size attachment. So what you can do is you can remove the sawdust bag, attach a shop vac hose to the back where the bag was, and you just turn your shop vac on when you're making your cuts, and you will have very minimal cleanup with the sawdust.
Yes, because it's basically sucking all the dust out like a vacuum cleaner.
Right, and the bag sticks out off the back of the saw probably about 6 to 8 inches. So if you're tight on space on where your miter saw sits, you could probably get a 90-degree attachment, hook that hose up for the shop vac, and you can kind of minimize that space and allow yourself a little more working room.
All right, so now you guys know how to use a miter saw. So leave below if we missed anything or any tricks that you may have.
And I challenge you to now go and use a miter saw, make those cuts, design something awesome.
And if you want to try to use a miter saw, but you don't want to splurge and buy one, which we'll have ours linked down below and all the tools we use. But if you are too nervous to just buy one and go all in, you can always rent tools. That is something we do all the time.
Yep.
You can rent it, see how you feel with it, see if it's something that you would like to invest in, and then you can buy one because you're going to love it.
Endless possibilities.
Yes.
If you have a specific tool that you would like to see, put that in the comments below because we love to tune into you guys.
Yes. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you're not already, and we'll see y'all in the next video.
Bye guys.